might bring you love.
It's bringing love. Don't let it get away.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple. This is the show where I rave and rant about board games, but usually more the latter. This was probably my top pick for Essen in terms of anticipated games. I tested this out back at the Games Expo for about 2 rounds, really good demo, and instantly fell in love with it then. So definitely this was high on my anticipated list for Essen, and it was certainly one of the first games actually was the first game I got. We were able to get a copy on Wednesday at the press event, and basically we went away and played about 3 games of it in a row because, well, we didn't have any other games at the time, but also I wanted to get it played. And I've played it more since then, so certainly this is probably one of the fastest I've managed to get one of the Essen reviews done. But this one, essentially from Czech Game Editions, is one of 3 games being brought out by this designer. Now, I hope I pronounce it right, Tomáš Hojek.
Who?
Czech Republic, I don't know these names, but I couldn't exactly find an easy way to pronounce it. But, you know, met the guy briefly at Essen, and, you know, very nice chap. But he's got SETI, he's got Galileo Galilei, and Tea Garden, all released at the same convention. 3 games, 3 separate complexities, 3 separate publishers. That is ballsy to say the least. And fair play if you can manage to pull off all 3 of them being good games.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Well, this is the heaviest of the 3, SETI, where you are searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, hence the name SETI, and it's supposedly a step up above something like Lost Ruins of Arnak in terms of complexity, but it's meant to feature multi-use cards, simple gameplay, a theme that works, and some variety in how the end game plays out based on these alien boards that are different each time you play. So it's got a lot of ingredients here to be a pretty damn good seller. Question is, did it pay off? Did they meet the mark? Have they given me exactly what I need in this game? Or, you know, was I going to be disappointed? Let's see.
Get on with it.
Right, there's a lot to go over, so I'll try and drum it down to as small as I can. But essentially, it's a game of exploration and ultimately discovery. You have your board, which I can't get out on the table because there's far too much space taken up. You have to look at the photos. But the idea is that you are trying to amass the most victory points by a variety of different ways. You are scanning for different signals from alien life that is out there, which are essentially represented by data tokens that take up these nice little cool sort of blue beads inside each sector. But then you're also sending out little probes, little satellites effectively, to go inspect the neighbouring planets, Venus, Mars, Mercury and all that. You fly your probe around space, you land on the planets, it gets you bonuses, but what it's all kind of building up to as you do these is you're trying to build up to discover 2 technically, of 5 alien races. So these boards are set up randomly at the start of the game. You only pick 2 out of the 5. And as the game progresses, one of them will be discovered relatively early in the game and the other one a little bit later. But basically, these alien boards have some special rules and cards associated with them, and, you know, some other places to go for victory points as you progress through the game. On top of that, you also have on your board various technologies that you can upgrade your actions with, so you can make your probes cheaper or faster, etc. You can make your scanning a lot more widespread, or you have your little supercomputer here down the bottom, which when you get loaded up with a bunch of these data tokens from getting signals and stuff, you can effectively power up the computer with other little bonuses that you load up with these data tokens. All of these 3 things are kind of the crux of how you get victory points. But one of the other major mechanics of the game is one thing that I always love, which is multi-use cards. You will have a hand of these cards and you'll be able to draw more as the game goes on and get more as each round progresses. Oh, one trying to escape there. And essentially, these cards have, as I say, multiple uses. You can play them for their effect, it costs credits, and they do some really cool effect. But you can also discard the card to get the bonus at the top left of the card. The top right of the card will have something that is relevant for when you're scanning for signals. You can potentially get rid of cards for further signals. And then it also has an income icon on the bottom, which when you're able to trigger the icon to basically get more income each round, you tuck this card underneath you have a separate income card, but you could make it your board. But as you tuck it under in future rounds, you'll get that as income. And this can be energy credits, it can be energy or credits or cards, and there's some other more powerful ones besides. So the game lasts for 5 rounds in total, at which at the end of 5 rounds you total up all the victory points from all the various different sources, most of which you'll have scored during the game, but there's a few endgame objectives you can also grab, and some of the cards that you'll be playing have missions that you can complete during the game, which can score you points at the end if you fulfill them, and once you've done that, see who's got the most.
Of course!
Okay, a fairly short, quick overview because I think I'd be here until next Wednesday if I tried any more. But let's start with the pros. Firstly, aesthetics-wise, it's pretty clean. It's not the most, the best looking game that Czech Game Editions have ever produced. I mean, I think Arnak would certainly take the award for that. But this one still looks good on the table. I mean, you've got these cool little data pieces with the numbers etched into them. They kind of look like little blue sweets. They are jumping on their Rewood program again, which is what they used in Kutna Horror, which is essentially recycled wood. So these pieces here, they're not miniatures, they are basically wooden pieces shaped like satellites and little signal tokens, so they look pretty cool and they come in the different colours. The artwork on the cards, nothing to necessarily write home about, but it's all good space artwork with satellites and planets and things like that. I particularly love the back of the cards and the box itself. I think that is a really striking cover that's easily going to turn people's heads. But I also particularly like the board itself. Now obviously this is not the full board, you can see in the photos what it looks like fully laid out, but I like having this effectively like this big ring around the main center of the board, and then having this bit in the middle, which as you go through the different turns and do various actions, you'll actually spin this. So this actually rotates around this big sun thing in the middle, but sometimes you only rotate the top layer, sometimes it's both layers, sometimes it's all layers, and so this changes the relative position of the planets based on where your probes are. These little bits all come together to make a decent package. Now, it's not the cheapest game in the world, but you are getting a lot of pieces. I mean, this is a small amount of what is in there, and the board itself, I mean, it comes in multiple pieces. You've got this huge bit here for, technologies, and then I've got to open, this thing up in half, and then you've got this part here with all the planets and the iconography in that. It's a bit of a table hog, certainly, when you get it out and when you're trying to sort out all your player boards and everything like that. So this will take up a fair bit of space, I do warn you, particularly with 4 players, but it's a decent looker, and you're not getting cheapness. It doesn't feel cheap. It feels adequate. It's not going to win any awards, but it's not going to, make you go, oh, that's cheap and nasty either.
You get to make and break the rules here.
For what is a fairly meaty game, I also found this relatively straightforward to teach. I got taught this at the expo, as I said, a 2-round demo. It was partially scripted, but I got everything as we were going through. The iconography in this game is pretty clear. You won't have a lot of times when you look at something and you don't understand what it does. And if you are really that stuck, you do have a really good personal guide in front of you, which tells you all the actions and how much they cost and basics of what they do. Thank God, these are always needed. You've then got the full iconography guide on the back, which should be every icon you ever need to worry about, and then you've got stuff like the technologies and the scoring tiles in the middle, which most of them are self-explanatory and you'll know them at the start of the game, so you can basically just have this when you need it, but for the most part you'll look at the front and the back. These are very good little guides. But even the rulebook, I mean, it looks like a ginormous rulebook and it's got a lot of pages, but that's because the font is very big, easy to read, and there is a lot of pictorial examples in here. I mean, just orbiting a planet is only about 2 paragraphs of text, but then you've got this huge picture here to illustrate what it means when you actually orbit a planet and how you move around the place. So, there's not actually as much to read in here as you might think. And when we got this game on the Wednesday, me and one of the guys from Who's Turning It Anyway podcast, we basically got the game out and I said, right, it's been a while since I played it, a few months, you've never played this, we are going to learn this from the rulebook. So the first game we played was a 2-player and I taught it basically from the rulebook. And literally, I think we tripped up twice. And that was only a couple of rules reminders, which are on the back of the book. So that was on us for missing them. But that was it. There were 2 really minor bits that we tripped up on. Other than that, we got everything down and we played it just fine. It's very, very smooth for how much meat there is. It doesn't feel clunky. It doesn't feel like it's grinding its gears all the time. It just feels, I feel like every time I get this out for new players, I can teach it in a pretty quick space of time for how much is going on. Even when you get the new aliens out, which we'll talk about in a bit, they've got their own little rules reference sheet, which is very easy to read if you've come across it for the first time, but once you've done that alien race once or twice, then you'll mostly remember all this stuff, and this is just a good little memory jogger. Even has the solo rules part of it, which we'll get onto later.
But wait!
Particular mechanisms that I always like in a lot of games, multi-use cards. I do love multi-use cards. I like having a card that gives me a decision in multiple ways of like, right, how am I going to use this? Am I going to use it for this bonus? Am I going to use it as income? Do I want to play it? I really would like to play it, but I am going to need it for this. So, well, I could spend this to help make this action better, but then if I spend the card, I don't have it anymore. It's like, it's always that's just a nice little tense decision. And depending on how you set up your income or how you sort of start your engine, you'll be able to have a lot of these or not that many. I suppose the only niggle I do have with these is as much as there are a lot of cards, I mean, this is not even all of them. And there's already, as you can see, quite a substantial amount of unique cards in here. I do wish maybe there was just a little bit more ways to actually play them, because unless you've got a lot of credits hanging around, a lot of the times you won't necessarily play these for their main effect. You'll use them as the disposable income and, you know, special bonus things. Which again is still using the card for something useful, but yeah, unless you're swimming in credits, you're not going to be playing a ton of these as the game goes through, and I kind of wish maybe there was just a little bit more ease to do that. You compare it to something like Arnak, you know, where it's very easy to play a lot of the cards in your hand. Here, it's just that little bit more difficult.
Is bread free? Yeah. We'll split an order.
I also particularly like the way these alien boards work. You've only got 5 of them in the game, but you only put 2 of them in each game. So there's a decent amount of variety for a few games, not to mention the combinations of how they interact with the players. The alien species don't necessarily interact with each other, but it's like, you know, if you've got one that requires you, well, let's take an example for here. This is probably my favorite one in the whole lot. This one, where the what are they called?
I am Lur of the planet Omicron Persei 8. Turn down the TV and
oh no, the Centaurians. Yeah, they've all got their real name. This one basically gives you ways to spend data tokens for points, a little bonus that you get further along the track, but this is all down to long-range message beaming. So basically, the points track, you play cards from this race with markers on the point track, and 15 points ahead of your current marker. Once you reach it, you get the added bonus of the card you played. Not only is this a really good source of theme in this game, I mean the theme in this game is very well represented for what is effectively about getting victory points, but it's a cool aspect to this alien faction. Now compare it to something like the race. I cannot pronounce this name to save my life. It sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. But basically it gives you this big meteorite that you can go land on and get fossils and trade them in for points. The artifact basically gives you bonuses as the galaxy spins round, depending on how well you've sort of researched it. You've then got a kind of little pick up and deliver egg system with something that basically is ripping off Starship Troopers. And then you've got probably my least favorite out of all of them, the exertions, which is basically like, it looks a bit like Krypton after it's blown up. And essentially you've got these cards that you can play for more objective based points, but the more of them you play, the more you have the chance of accidentally having too much what they call like danger rating. And if you have the most, you actually lose 10% of your points at the end of the game, which can be a sizable chunk, given that it's not too difficult to breach 150 to 200 points in this game. It's quite a high VP affair. But these are cool to have, and if they ever expand SETI in the future, all you got to do is just give me a bunch of these more cards, more cards to play, and give me a bunch more of these alien factions. That's it. You don't need to add more mechanisms to the game in terms of the core gameplay. Core gameplay is already fine. But now you can just basically give me an alien collection, and you can change up this game really nicely.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
SETI is one of those games where even though you're only doing one action per turn out of many actions, like do I scan, do I land, do I orbit, do I grab a tech, it's a bit like Arnak in that respect. SETI does allow you to set up some pretty fulfilling, self-satisfying turns where you perform one action that then combos into this, which then combos into that and gets you 1,000,000 points.
Damn, I'm possessed.
Sometimes it can feel a little bit swingy in that respect. The fact that you were like behind by a fair bit and then all of a sudden that turn just got you another 30 points and now you're whopping ahead. But then that's available to everybody. It's just this game allows you to set yourself up. You've got that weird meteorite alien I mentioned before. If you can discard 4 fossils by collecting them on this thing, as well as the points you've already been getting, you can then get another 25 just by going on this particular spot here with one of your life traces. It's one of the tokens you collect for doing things. And you do this and you get a ton of points and your turn just feels really, really good. And this comes more often than you might think. It's not just, it's a one-off or anything like that. And sometimes it will take a couple of steps to get there, 2 or 3 steps, you'll plan ahead. but it happens more often than you might think. You know, you can get a decent amount of turns in the game, although your first couple of rounds, a bit like in Arnak, are going to be less fraught with turns because you'll only have so many resources. But then rounds 4 and 5 in particular, you're doing quite a lot before the round ends and triggering lots of different bonus stuff, all really fulfilling, you know. And it's not so much creating like crazy combos, but this is at its core an engine building game, and later on you'll have an engine that's like, you know, doing particularly well in like producing a particular type of income, or getting you a lot of cards, or allowing you to do lots of probing and scanning, or landing on planets, etc. So you've got a lot of rewards to get. It doesn't feel too pressured, and you don't feel too much in a situation where I can't do anything. But again, it's not autopilot, so you do have to be careful not to, you know, spend certain resources when you could have made it more efficient use of it elsewhere. It's just tight enough without being too tight. Now, to go over some blemishes, the time that this game takes to play does ramp up quite quickly when you add in the players. This goes from 1 to 4. I'm so glad they didn't try to get on that whole 5-player bandwagon, because if they ever do add a 5th player to this game, I will be banning its use, because the game is 40 minutes per player, and that's pretty accurate, actually. You know, you can get this game done relatively quickly in a 2-player game, but there's still a decent amount of actions going around. 4 players will set this game up to the 2.5-hour mark, can potentially go to 3 in your first game if you're playing with new players or anybody who's like AP and not thinking about their turn ahead of time. But it's not a short affair. You can get Arnak played, I think, in a quicker time than this one, although the two of them can be somewhat comparable. Now, this one is definitely a little bit heavier than Arnak. You know, it's not that much heavier, probably a step up, just one step above what Arnak is. But you got to be a little bit wary about playing this with 4 players too often. Now, in terms of interaction with each other, there's not a great deal of it either. Yes, you might be fending for spots like where you're, you know, when are they going to turn this galaxy? That's going to mess up my probes. But then there's also, are you going to grab these particular spots before me? Are you going to grab this before I do? That's kind of really the only major interaction in the game, other than a little area control mechanism where basically when you take these signals off the scanning sectors, when they're all taken off, it's basically who has the most there, they get a prize, second place gets a little consolation, that kind of thing. And that's kind of it. So it's not the most interactive Euro in the world. It's just one of those where you've got to pay attention to other players, make sure they don't nick your stuff. So it definitely does feel that 4 players might be just pushing it a little bit too far in terms of adequate time length. 3 players is definitely, I think, a sweet spot. It's like the perfect amount for this game to have that little bit of competition without being too, you know, wishy-washy with the area control scanning mechanisms, because you find that in 2 players, yes, the game goes on at a much quicker pace, but then when it comes to this area control bit here, you find that with 2 players, this bit doesn't scale. So you end up with a lot of sectors where you scan for stuff, but it takes ages for them to resolve. In 4 players, they'll resolve a lot quicker, but then you're adding more time length to the game. 3 just seems to be that sweet spot.
Well, that's a lot less hot.
Now, SETI does boast a solo mode, and I am putting it in the bad category, but it's kind of half and half. On the good side, it's very easy to learn the solo mode. There's only a few pages at the back. Once you're comfortable with the main game, learning the solo mode should not be tricky. And it doesn't really use a lot of the resources in the game. It converts them into this track that it loops around as it soups up in power. You've also got these little objectives tokens, though, that you have to commit to fulfilling, because if you don't fulfill them, then not only do they get more points at the end, but they also ramp up in power quicker, which means they get more actions. This is a cool little short-term twist to give you a bit of an edge in the game, but the only thing that's annoying is that the objectives come out at random and they don't backtrack. So I might have one that says, go land on Venus, which takes, you know, effort to do. The problem is, I've just gone and landed on Venus. And now the objective suddenly comes out, which means, so I don't get any reward for the fact that I've just landed on Venus. I now have to go land on it again, which I can't do because I've only just managed to do it the once. That's a little frustrating and annoying. I wish they'd completed if you had done it during the game. Would that make the AI a bit too easy? I don't know, because I've played this on up to 4 levels of difficulty. There's 5 levels of difficulty in the game, and you basically flip over your player board to get the respective one, and Level 1 is a cakewalk. It doesn't use, I don't think it uses the objectives even, it's just basic game. Level 1, you will beat it with your eyes closed, it's like no trouble. Level 2, throws in the objectives, a little bit more of a challenge, but you should probably still beat it if you're halfway competent. 3 was more of a challenge. 3, I found that the AI does get a lot of points quite quickly in the 3-star difficulty, and I barely beat it in the first time I did it, but certainly I had to work for it. So 3 seems like the fairest of the lot. When you soup this up to level 4 and 5 though, holy Christ. It does ramp up on the difficulty on that one, yes. If you want a substantial challenge, you play on difficulty 4 and 5. But honestly, I just find that the game gets a little bit, not enough fun at that point. It's just a little bit too cheaty for my liking when you get to that level. I like a little bit of a challenge in my solo games, but not to be punched in the face repeatedly.
Just give us a fucking chance, you son of a bitch!
But where the solo mode starts to falter a little bit is when you get into the late game for solo. There's a lot to keep up with. Not necessarily to pilot their initial flip the card and see what they do, but when you're doing turns, you're keying off a lot of stuff. Like, I do this, and then this activates this, which then activates that, and I get this cool bonus, and that's quite fulfilling. It's a little bit more annoying when you got to do it for the AI on a regular basis. Now, when they flip the different alien powers, they've also got different tweaks for how the solo mode interacts with them, which means more learning. But the solo mode basically gets to a point where most of what it does is scan, and scan, and scan, and scan, relentlessly. It just constantly powers up its little supercomputer at the bottom with enough data tokens that even with just the 2 of you, you'll actually almost run out of these and need to substitute them with other items. They just constantly keep scanning, and that gets a little bit fiddly to have to deal with, because you got to go, right, hang on, so they're going to scan and take off that one, and then that one, and then that means that resolves, right, okay, so what do I get for second place? Right, they get that for first, which gives them a life trace, which suddenly gets that bonus, and then that triggers, it's like, it gets a little bit long-winded piloting it in the late game, to the point where, when you start to get to that area, it's like, I wish it was just that little bit more smoother, or I didn't have to pilot quite so much for them, trigger so many things for them. It's fun when you do it for yourself, not when you're having to do it for another player all the time. And that doesn't kill the enjoyment entirely, but it does diminish it a little bit. I just wish that maybe it wasn't quite so active in the later time of the game, and I wish it did some stuff other than just scan most of the time. I know it can't do every mechanic in a game, it certainly can't play cards and stuff, but when repeatedly you flip a card, it's like scan, scan, scan. Christ's sake, will you stop scanning? And it's just scan and activate your computer, scan and activate your computer, and scan and activate your computer. It just keeps doing that cycle on a regular basis, and it gets a little bit tedious and just annoying having to constantly trigger it.
Oh, how convenient. A theory about God that doesn't require looking through a telescope.
The only other minor small blemish is the technology tiles. You've got the technology tiles which you can buy during the game, and they certainly do gear you up for your particular strategy. Like, am I going to focus a lot on the probes, or the scanning, or the supercomputer? But there's only 4 of each, and they don't really change. And the supercomputer is basically just which bonus would you like. So it's not really much of a tech, it's just adding bonuses to this thing. So really, you've only got 8 unique technologies in the game. The most varied ones are on the probes. The scanning ones is mostly just you remove more tokens, but in different ways. And one of them, which allows you to send off probes or move them while you're doing scanning, I don't find as useful a tech. Certainly not compared to some of the other probe-specific ones, like, being able to land on moons for a lot of good points, or being able to land in orbit much cheaper. That's already pretty decent. But yeah, the technologies is just not as varied as I would have liked. It might be cool maybe if there's a way in the future to add more, but the problem is if you did that, that they've got specific diagrams on these bits for the techs, so you wouldn't really be able to add more technologies without completely redesigning the player board, so I don't think that's going to be a factor in the future. So I just would have liked a little bit more variety in there, but again, that's not a big deal. SETI has got a lot going for it that I really like. I mean, it looks the part, even though it's not necessarily the best looking game ever, but that cover, really striking with the back of these cards. That is gorgeous. But I love the fact that for a game that is relatively heavy, this is one of the smoothest games I have found to teach in terms of its weight. There are some other smoother ones out there, but, compared to some other heavy games that have a lot of rules or a few clunky aspects, this one still feels quite smooth. And I like the fact that you can teach some of the game now, but then wait a little bit later to teach the rest because of the fact that you don't know which of the 2 aliens you've got. The game, gives you a lot of different actions to do, different paths to victory, different ways to specialize with the technologies, but it doesn't feel too tight. You're not autopiloting, but you are still, having to be careful with your resources, but it never goes to that level where you feel too frustrated that I just can't seem to achieve anything. You'll achieve big turns with big points, and they will be satisfying when you do. The rulebook I found easy to follow. It's not, I've heard a couple of people mention one or two blemishes they had with it, but personally, I taught it 2-player from the book, and apart from a couple of tiny rules reminders, we never tripped up, so I think that, that's done really well. You've got a solid solo mode that's not that's not hard to learn, but it does get a little bit bogged down with its constant scanning and some of its, piloting in the late game. That is a little bit of an issue. You kind of want to stay away from solo until you're really familiar with the game, but and it can go a little bit long with 4 players, but it's still enjoyable with 4. It's just 3 is definitely the sweet spot of the game, and 2 does have that little blemish with the area control. So, the game is certainly not flawless. There are still, some issues that you've got to bear in mind. But I get a kick out of playing this game. And remember, we played a demo of it, and I already thought it was going to be great at that point after the demo. Then I let it sit for a little while, and it was anticipated for Essen. We got the game, and we played it 3 times in a row. 3 times! That's not something that I do with a lot of heavy games. A lot of heavy games you'll play it once and then put it away. Maybe you'll do it twice or something, but 3, that's insane. And I've played it since solo and in groups, and it's just been great fun to show people. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that it's not that difficult to teach for what is definitely a step up above Arnak. Now, if you were to put a gun to my head and tell me which of the 2 I prefer out of Arnak and SETI, that is a tough one. Arnak has had expansions, it's got a very good solo mode in it. I think overall I would pick Arnak as the superior game. They do play very differently though, so don't think that, oh yeah, once you've got SETI you don't need Arnak. They play very differently and they're 2 very different games, but they are both from Czech game editions. They both got that similar weight level. Of course you're going to compare them. But I love this variety with the aliens, and I love the fact that in the future we can just get expansion content with more of these. I think that's a brilliant little system. I like the multi-use cards. That's always good fun. I like the spinny Galaxy board. I like the fact that I can change up my tactics on the fly, seek opportunism with the cards. The alien flips over and gives me some of those cool cards that power up, that give me something now, and then 15 points later give me something else. It's like, those sort of stuff is really cool in a theme that's represented well. We get space battles and space sci-fi and freighters and aliens that already exist, but the idea that this is beaming out to space and it's all more kind of like a NASA type thing is not a theme we see very often, and this one actually manages to represent it fairly well, even though you have to abstract some elements and realize it's about gaining victory points. A lot of that comes down from these alien boards, but kudos for actually trying to make the theme work. So yes, it's not flawless. No game ever is. But this is still a benchmark game for me, and probably my favorite game, or certainly at least one of the favorites I've played all year. This is a 10 out of 10 for me. I love this game. This is going on my shelf. It is going to sit right alongside Arnak on the Czech Game Edition's shelf. And if I'm ever playing like games from them, those are the 2 that I'm going to pull off the shelf first. Hands down. They are easily going to be like, oh yeah, which one are we going to play? I don't mind. They just seem to have a bit of a knack for doing this kind of sort of heavy but not too heavyweight with a decent theme. It really does tick a lot of boxes. Yes, a little bit long with 4. Can be a little bit hard to pilot the solo up to a point, although some people do it better than others. And certainly, a little bit longish with 4, as I said. But those blemishes aside, they're not enough to drop it down to a 9. I love it. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this as well. Definitely one of the best Euros I've picked up from Essen so far. There's a lot of other competition besides, so we'll get on to more ones that might be able to surpass this. But for now, this is one of the best I've played this year.
I bring you love.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek, because it will go live on that site as well. You know, I like to get the outreach everywhere, and of course share it on Facebook, let people know the game's out there, let people know I've reviewed it, to share the video. That always helps engagement and gets the views in. Can't help you enough. Consider signing up to the Patreon. You know, I went to Essen, I get some review copies, but a lot of it I still had to buy out of my own pocket, and the Patreon support is what allows me to get so many of these games to review. I mean, this pile I brought back is only possible because the Patreons help make it possible. And of course, you will also get the benefit of being able to vote on top 10 lists in the future and suggest, you know, your preference for which games I review first. You know, give you something back for helping me. So until next time, remember, regardless of whether you know that the truth is out there, it's still only a game. So bye for now.